Welcome back with a smiling face. Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. Echoes of Shattered Destiny. Episode 2. Chapter 9 to 16. The others were quick to respond as one of our own had been found. I couldn't peel my eyes away from Katie's glassy stare, even when Mason's gentle hand turned me from her body. We had shifted into human form after alerting the others, pulling on a t-shirt and a pair of sweatpants that were stashed in the forest. "Don't look at her, Lola," Mason murmured. His typical carefree expression was absent from his face. Could a wolf have done this? Maya mused in my head. I shook my head in response. It's possible. It takes incredible skill to cover your scent like that. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest, and the cool nighttime breeze felt sharp against my skin. As awful as it sounds, I had grown used to blocking things from my mind. While Katie's glassy stare would surely haunt my dreams, I pushed the image from my conscious mind. Alpha Maddox and his men had taken a total of 6 minutes to arrive in the clearing. Maddox looked delectable in his loose-fitting shorts, his bare chest absorbing the moonlight and taking on a porcelain glow. As much as my mind wanted to linger on Maddox and find some semblance of peace, there was business to attend to. He brought a lot of men with him. Maya pointed out that interesting fact. I frowned. Kind of strange, isn't it? There had to be at least 15 men that followed Maddox into the clearing. Far too many men for what looked like a simple rogue attack. A man I hadn't met before approached Mason and I while Maddox looked over Katie's lifeless body. The unnamed man was nearly as intimidating as Maddox himself, but he lacked the powerful aura that Maddox seemed to constantly exude. "Beta Drake," Mason murmured, nodding his head in an act of respect. Beta Drake was the man mentioned when I first arrived at the pack borders. No wonder Sean was in such a sour mood when I finally arrived home. Maddox had no need for another beta when he had one of his own. Sean had essentially been stripped of his title, a title my family had held for years. Beta Drake had the same extremely large build all of Maddox's men had, as if giant blood ran in their family. A long scar ran down the side of his neck, disappearing under the t-shirt he wore. His hair was a strange shade of ash blonde and reached down to his ears. "Tell me tonight's events leading up to the discovery of the she-wolf." Beta Drake spoke in a very informal tone. "Do not leave anything out." Mason glanced at me, and with reluctance I began to speak. I kept my hammering heart under control, determined to keep my wandering eyes away from Katie's body. The last thing I needed was to lose what tight grip I had on my emotions. Much to my surprise, my voice came out calm and steady. The turmoil I was feeling inside didn't rear its ugly head. Mason chimed in here and there, confirming my account of tonight's events. Maddox hadn't approached the two of us, nor spared us a glance as we left from the clearing. Mason, kind as always, walked me home in silence. "First night of patrol and this happens." Mason shook his head, a frown forming on his pale lips. I scoffed, but the action was filled with exhaustion. "Not a very good sign, is it?" Mason shook his head. "Not at all. There were too many of Maddox's men there tonight for it to be a simple rogue attack." I pursed my lips, the gears in my mind turning. "You think so?" Mason's head tilted slightly as my words sunk in. I shrugged. 15 men seems like an awful lot. Rogue attacks happen sometimes, but tonight seemed different. "I think we both need some sleep. Try not to think about it too much." Mason frowned as we stood on the stairs to my house. "I'll see you for training tomorrow, right?" I rolled my eyes, gaining some of my sarcastic humor back. Like Alpha Maddox would let me miss training. Mason grinned, but it was one that took effort to maintain. Good, I'll hunt you down myself if you don't show. I waved Mason off and went inside. It didn't seem like Sean was home, but Grandma and Dad sat in the living room. From the looks of it, they were having a hushed conversation between themselves. I couldn't make out any of the words exchanged between the two of them, but the one word I heard was crystal clear: Lana. They're talking like two people who don't want to be overheard. Maya mumbled in my head. As much as I wanted to care, to inquire what they were talking about, the night had been long enough. Both of their heads snapped to the door as I walked in, and Dad lifted himself to his feet. Sean told us something happened tonight at patrol. Dad frowned, his gruff voice full of worry. I frowned and crossed my arms. A girl was found dead. Looks like a rogue attack. Dad wasn't placated. I don't want you out running patrol anymore, or anywhere near the woods for that matter. I understood where he was coming from, but I also knew his personal needs wouldn't overcome Alpha Maddox's. You know that won't happen, Dad. I frowned, plopping down on the couch next to Grandma. I'm not losing you or Sean. Dad growled, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. I sighed, wanting nothing more than to head to bed. Alpha Maddox would never allow that. He can't let half the people in town stop showing up for patrol cause their families are scared. Lola, just listen to me on this. Dad grimaced, but I had already had enough. No, I stood from the couch. I will not run again. I'm back now, and I can handle myself. The previous exhaustion that tinged my words had faded, leaving behind something else. A sense of power and authority filled me, one that didn't quite feel right in a werewolf. Dad's jaw clenched, but if he could feel the strange waves rolling off of me, he made no indication. After a few moments, the strange sensation subsided, leaving me feeling drained and somewhat groggy. What the hell was that? Maya sounded just as confused and tired as I. I have no idea. I grumbled, my limbs feeling heavy. All I know is I need some sleep. Dad still stood with his jaw clenched while Grandma looked quite pale. I'm heading to bed now. I mumbled, trudging up the stairs. I have training in the morning. Falling asleep that night had been effortless, and I made sure to set an alarm for the morning. As I thought, Katie haunted my dreams. Her glassy green eyes were burned into my head, along with the image of her scarlet-stained throat. The dream felt so real, and I had almost mistaken it for reality. It was one detail that stood out. It reminded me this wasn't reality. A set of blazing red eyes stared at me through the forest, scalding me with its intensity. While the chilling dreams of Katie hindered my sleep, I felt refreshed after the events of yesterday. I pulled myself from the bed and slipped on a black sports bra and a pair of workout shorts. Slipping my long hair into a ponytail and my shoes on my feet, I jogged downstairs. Dad was nowhere in sight, but Grandma stood in the kitchen flipping something in a pan. The sticky sweet smell of pancakes filled my nose and I plopped down at the table. On time for once, I see. Grandma turned and flashed me a cheeky grin. I smirked at my grandma and grabbed a water from the fridge. Very funny, but yes, I'll be on time for once. Good thing, I was afraid Alpha Maddox would show up to torment you some more. Grandma smirked, a strange flicker of knowledge gleaming in her eyes. Torment? Maya mused, certainly didn't feel like torment. Hush! I scolded her, pushing my strange attraction to Maddox aside. I turned my attention to the steaming pancakes she had set on a plate, ignoring the light blush that formed on my cheeks. Where's Dad? I frowned, glancing at the plate of pancakes she set in front of me. Grandma shook her head and sat down, a cup of steaming tea clasped in her hands. Your dad's upset. Grandma frowned, he just needs some time. I sighed, I didn't want to upset him. Oh, he's not upset with you, dear. Grandma gave me a kind smile, just afraid and feeling quite helpless. Did he tell you that himself? I raised my eyebrow at her, knowing how Dad was. Grandma chuckled, oh heavens no. You know your dad is much too stubborn to admit that, but a mother knows. I snickered, I wouldn't say that's how you know, Grandma. You've always been too smart for your own good. Now that I can agree with. Grandma chuckled. I left the house with a full stomach, walking to the pack house with Brianna and Mason at my side. The conversation was light, but not as carefree as I had hoped for. Death lingered in the air, the news of Katie's murder had reached all ears. I'm surprised Alpha Maddox didn't keep this from anyone. I shook my head. I could only imagine how Katie's poor parents were doing. Brianna shook her head, her short hair shifting. Alpha Maddox isn't like that. I guess that's a good thing. Mason shrugged. We arrived at the pack house along with the other trainees. Brianna and I threw our change of clothes in the lockers and headed out to the mats. You ready to get your butt kicked today, Shorty? Mason snickered, leaning down to whisper in my ear. I scoffed and turned to him, my fists raised. Bring it on. You still can't take me. Mason chuckled, I bet you I'll get at least one good hit in. Bring it on, Mason. I poked my tongue out, jabbing one of my fists at his abdomen. Alpha Maddox's powerful aura filled the room and I knew without looking that he had entered. My eyes immediately found his own, and they darkened as they took my face in. I was standing closely to Mason, our arms grazing each other as Mason looked down at me with an amused expression on his face. Alpha Maddox looks irritable. Mason whispered lowly in my ear and I fought to keep a smile from playing on my lips. He does, doesn't he? I giggled, keeping my voice low as well. Maddox looked irritable and irresistible. He was wearing a black tank top that highlighted the large muscles along his arms. His scars stood out proudly, giving him that sense of experience and danger. His chocolate hair was tousled as his darkened honey-coated eyes looked my way. Attention, everyone! Alpha Maddox snapped. As you all know, one of our own was murdered last night. With times such as these, we must be more prepared than ever. A thick silence fell over the crowd as we took in Maddox's words. It sure didn't sound like some one-off rogue attack. Now that we have one opening in the class, a change must be made. My stomach dropped when Alpha Maddox's honey eyes stared directly at me, a grim sense of amusement flickering in his gaze. That doesn't sound good. Mason muttered under his breath. Mason, partner up with Dominic. Alpha Maddox commanded, his voice laced with the authority that ran in his blood. This is gonna hurt. Maya groaned. This is what happens when you continue to piss the Alpha off. Don't act like you didn't encourage it when his hand was in my pants. I snapped at her, and thankfully she went silent. I hissed, grinding my teeth together as irritation flashed in my eyes. Sorry, Shorty. Mason whispered in my ear, trudging over to Dominic. Pair off and continue where we left off Friday. Alpha Maddox snapped. I stayed rooted in place as Alpha Maddox glided over to me. It took an incredible amount of self-control to keep my gaze from wandering down his strong face to his chiseled body. I will stand in as your partner. Alpha Maddox's honey-colored gaze was emotionless as he stopped in front of me. Blame it on me feeling cranky, or the fact that I was tired of getting picked on by Alpha Maddox, but I had no control when the words tumbled from my lips. Why do you feel the need to pick on me? I snapped, stomping past Alpha Maddox and onto a free portion of the mats. If I thought I had gotten away, I was sorely mistaken. In an instant I was slammed onto the floor. The thin padding of the mat did nothing to stop the breath from being knocked from my lungs. A dark-eyed Alpha Maddox stood over me, his gaze hard as he stared me down. Someone thinks highly of themselves. Alpha Maddox's comment was hard, sending an embarrassed heat to flood through me. I grunted and pulled myself from the ground, readying for Maddox's next attack. "Oh, you have no idea," I hissed, grunting as his fist schemed my waist, "how highly I think of myself." I managed to dodge one of his attacks, my anger fueling me to move faster. Maddox seemed to be taking his frustration out on me today as his hits stung a little more than usual. We went on like this for half the class. Maddox would lunge with speed and precision that stunned me, and I would scramble to dodge his vicious attacks. If you learned just a shred of obedience, things may just be easier for you. Maddox grunted, his forearm connecting with my chest and sending me plummeting to the ground. I ground my teeth against the pain and sat up. Training had ended and the others were beginning to file out of the locker room. Now where's the fun in that? I snapped, glaring up at Maddox's towering form. Something flashed in Alpha Maddox's eyes, darkening them. "Is that how you acted with your old Alpha?" His voice was deadly calm. I could feel the waves of power rolling off of him, but the urge to run away and submit never came. Instead I glared up at him, daring him to say more. That familiar tingle of excitement mixed with fear and irritation came over me. "The old Alpha has nothing to do with this," I snapped, pulling myself from the floor yet again. "Is that so?" Alpha Maddox snapped, "The two of you were extremely close, I hear." Maddox's gaze was hard as the words fell from his lips, and I felt white-hot fury rush through me. Maddox had no right to speak to me like that. Everyone else in his pack might allow it, but I wouldn't. As an alpha, my past was none of his business. I spat, storming past him and into the empty locker rooms. I slammed my locker open in a huff. I blocked Maya from my mind, not wanting to hear anything anyone said at the moment. I was high on fury and was determined to ride it out. I pulled the ponytail from my hair and stuffed my sweaty gym shirt in my bag. I was too busy swimming in my anger to hear the locker room door open, or the lock clicking shut. Chapter 10. A yelp of surprise left my lips as something slammed me up against the lockers. My exposed chest and stomach pressed against the cold metal, sending goosebumps cascading down my skin. I was bare except for a thin bra and a pair of workout shorts. The familiar musky scent of male and cologne filled my nose and I gritted my teeth in annoyance. "You're the one who pissed him off," Maya mumbled, obviously thinking I deserved whatever came to me. I snapped back, "He's the one who took it too far. He's the alpha, he can take it however far he wants." Maya grumbled back. I rolled my eyes at her, "I don't care what he is. He can't act like he knows a single thing about us. And where do you think you're going?" His rough voice spoke lowly in my ear, slamming my chest against the lockers as I attempted to get out of his grasp. "Can't you just leave me alone?" I snapped, but deep down I knew I didn't mean it. Sure, Alpha Maddox had gone too far with his comment about Tyler, but under his touch something stirred to life between my legs. "What was that you said back there, Lola?" His rough voice was low in my ear and I resisted the urge to shudder at his concealed anger. "You're only gonna make this worse for us," Maya muttered, but she knew I wouldn't change my mind. Alpha Maddox did nothing but confuse me. He was cold and hostile with his ignorant remarks and demands of obedience, but the moment at the swimming hole had completely thrown me off. While his punishment left me frustrated for longer than I care to admit, deep down I had enjoyed his rough and primal behavior. A large hand intertwined itself in my hair, yanking my head back. I clamped my lips together to keep a yelp from emerging from my mouth. Sharp pain radiating from my head triggered something in between my legs. Pain mixed with the prickles of pleasure rolled down my head and neck. While I was furious, my body had a mind of its own. I asked you a question, Lola. His rough voice growled in my ear, giving my hair another sharp tug. I gritted my teeth again, determined to keep the smell of my arousal from his nose. I said, "FKU." I growled back. It was clear I had no regard for my own safety. If I didn't know any better, I'd think you were enjoying this, Lola. Alpha Maddox growled in my ear and I winced. The smell of my arousal had seeped from between my legs, filling the locker room with my scent. I grinned my teeth together and cursed my body for having a mind of its own. I had never acted this desperate before, but something about Alpha Maddox had my body reacting. Just as I was going to bite back some snarky retort, something else happened. Maddox must have been standing awfully close, because something was pressing into my backside. That something had my roaring to life. Where she was once scolding me for acting out, she now encouraged it. "And you say I'm bad?" I snapped at my hormone-driven wolf. Maya rolled her eyes. I thought he was going to kill us. It's obvious he wants something else. The pressure in between my legs was building and yet again I was willing to let Alpha Maddox have his way. I decided to take a risk, one that might do more harm than pay off. I pushed myself against him. "If anyone's enjoying this, it's you, Alpha." My voice came out low, ripe with the desire Alpha Maddox seemed to awaken within me. A deep rumble sounded from Alpha Maddox's chest. My head rattled as I was spun around and slammed against the lockers. My eyes met the darkened eyes of Maddox. I could feel the blood rushing to my face under his hostile gaze. The gold hues in his eyes were melting into the blackness that threatened to take them over. "Watch what you say, Lola. You wouldn't be able to handle me." Alpha Maddox growled lowly, his rough hand wrapping around the soft skin of my neck. A sound of pleasure escaped my lips when his grip around my neck tightened. Under his touch all of my sense seemed to fly out the window. "Don't be so sure, Maddox." I exhaled, my eyes trailing down his towering form. Any semblance of gold was now fully swallowed by the obsidian flecks swirling in his eyes. His grip around my neck tightened, only allowing me the smallest amount of air. Something had to be wrong with me. Here I was, practically being strangled by a hostile alpha, and all I could think about was him tearing the clothes from my body. "Alpha Maddox, Lola!" he snarled, leaning down so his face was only inches from my own. His hot breath smelled of mint. "Do not forget it." With one last low growl, Alpha Maddox let go of my throat and stormed from the locker room. Once again he left me equally excited and afraid, and despite my best judgment I was still begging for more. Frustrated and wanting more, I decided to head to the swimming hole. Any memories of Tyler and I at the swimming hole had faded under Alpha Maddox's touch. Alpha Maddox's touch seared my skin and sent waves of pleasure tumbling down. I left the pack house and frowned. I assumed Mason and Brianna would have stuck around. One quick look at my phone and I see why they hadn't. I was in the locker room for nearly half an hour with Maddox. I could only hope the scent of my arousal faded by the time tomorrow came around. I decided to call home and let Dad know I wouldn't be heading back from training right away. "Hello, Lola." My grandma's voice sounded on the other end of the phone and I sighed with relief. "Hey Grandma, I won't be home for a little bit," I replied, scrambling for an excuse. There was a pause on the other end. Does this have something to do with Alpha Maddox? I clamped my lips together and struggled for words. Grandma had always been a little too smart for her own good. She always seemed to know things she shouldn't. Dad and I used to joke that she'd be a WCH if it wasn't for her werewolf blood. No, I chuckled, trying to make it sound effortless. I just need some time to myself after what happened last night. I understand, dear. Grandma's kind voice called out, will Brianna or your other friend be with you? No. I frowned, hoping she wouldn't tell Dad. Just be safe, Lola. Grandma's voice was stern. I know you're more than capable of taking care of yourself, but try and stay clear of the forest for now. I will, Grandma. I lied. After I hung up the phone, the guilt set in. I hated lying to Grandma, but the swimming hole had always been somewhere safe and private I could go. Living in a pack was like having an entire town of siblings. There was never any alone time. I strolled down the road and to the edge of the forest, my eyes flickering around as I stepped inside. The sounds of the forest always worked to calm my nerves. The crickets and birds mixed with the smell of wet earth was like a sedative. In no time I could hear and smell the fresh water. I had enough tormenting from Alpha Maddox today, and decided to keep my clothes on. I simply walked to the edge of the water and sat down on one of the giant rocks. This rock in particular had a flat and smooth surface. While some part of me had missed home, another side desperately missed Grandma's cottage. Her little cottage with a dense forest surrounding it, was one of my favorite places to be. There was endless privacy for when Maya simply needed a run. The density of the forest around Grandma's house provided the perfect coverage for Maya to run around undetected. The fresh smell of herbs and wet grass in the morning had become the alarm I loved waking to. The wolf and human side of me were at odds. Maya loved living on her own, nothing but forest surrounding us. She chafed under command. I on the other hand felt a sense of duty to my family. Dad needed me, and Sean did too, whether he'd admit it or not. Things felt complete with Grandma living with the three of us. My churning sea of thoughts were cut short by the rustling of bushes and cracking of twigs. I had already assumed Alpha Maddox somehow followed me to the swimming hole again, but the noise was coming from the opposite direction. I scrambled off the smooth rock and away from the rushing water when a face I had once loved came into view, a face I never wanted to see again. Chapter 11. Tyler emerged from the brush of the forest, looking exactly how I had remembered him. His sandy blonde hair was slightly longer now, and his torso was a little more swollen with muscle. His blue eyes held the same arrogance they had held his entire life. His blue eyes were full of caution and some strange emotion as he slowly approached me. I'm alerting the others. Maya snapped. Wait. I demanded, I want to hear what he has to say. If he gets too close, I'm ripping his head off. Maya growled. Agreed. I replied. Lola. Tyler breathed, it's been a long time. I blinked at him stupidly. Out of everything he's done and put this pack through, that's all he has to say? No kidding. I snapped, you better come up with something better unless you want the others to find out you're here. Tyler shook his head, you wouldn't call them on me, would you, Lola? Like you said, it's been a long time. I kept my voice indifferent, staring at him with hard eyes. Seeing Tyler in person was proof that things had indeed changed. The butterflies that once scattered in my stomach under his blue-eyed gaze were now non-existent. Looking into the depths of his ocean eyes invoked none of the feelings they had used to. All I felt for him now was hate, a dangerous emotion for any creature to hold. Lola. Tyler's voice turned soft as he took another step towards me, you know I'd never hurt you. My heart squeezed at the sincerity in his words, but my mind knew better. Tyler only held interest in himself, he cared for only himself. The girl who had been raised alongside him was the one hurting. The new Lola felt nothing for him. Tyler took another tentative step. I made a mistake, Lola. I never should have left you. Don't listen to him. Maya growled, her eyes locked on Tyler. I shook my head, I'll never listen to him again. My heart squeezed again as Lola from the past finally heard the words she had been dreaming of. Just a few more steps. Maya murmured, and I was in silent agreement with her. What's done is done, Tyler. I snapped, you found your mate, now get lost. Tyler shook his head, she means nothing to me. It's always been you, Lola. I've loved you since the beginning, and even now I can't get you out of my head. What kind of game does he think he's playing? Maya snarled, desperate to sink her teeth into flesh. I had lost the ironclad hold I had on Maya for just a split second. A ferocious growl filled with fury ripped from my mouth. Maya was giving Tyler a warning, stop where you are and you won't die. Tyler immediately halted in his steps, caution filling his blue eyes. I came back for you, Lola. Tyler's voice was soft and dripping honesty. His honesty changed nothing. Even if I wanted to forgive him, Maya would never allow it. He had abandoned his entire pack, left them all for dead. My mom died for a pathetic alpha who swore to protect her. I had no choice, Lola. Tyler's blue eyes darted around frantically, I had to leave. You'd understand if you just came with me. Come with you. Maya snarled, never in a million years. My mom's dead, you know. I pointed out, reading the emotion in his eyes. Surprise and then guilt flashed in his eyes. Color me surprised, he actually feels bad. Maya scoffed incredulously. I shook my head, I don't know what to think. All I know is there's no way in hell we're going with him. I didn't know that, Lola. Tyler shook his head, I swear. What happened, Tyler? I snapped, you left everyone to die. Tyler shook his head furiously, that wasn't my intention, I swear. Maddox said he'd let me live if I abandoned the pack. Alpha Maddox would have let another alpha escape. Maya hissed, no alpha would. I gritted my teeth together. His eyes were brimming with sincerity, but something was off. Why would Alpha Maddox make a deal like that? The rumors about Maddox paint him as a merciless alpha, one who is swift when dealing death sentences. Why would he allow another alpha to escape? I don't believe him. Maya growled. I don't either, but you have to admit he is convincing. I frowned. Maya shook her head, anyone can lie. Why should I believe you, Tyler? I glared at him, you've done nothing to earn my trust. I had your trust once before. I can earn it again. Tyler frowned, but I wasn't hearing it. Leave Tyler. I snapped, my eyes hardening as I glared at him. Flee, before I call the others. Shouldn't be too hard for him. He's better at running away than running a pack. Maya snickered. The sincerity and honesty that had once been flooding his ocean eyes faded, and was quickly replaced by a hard and almost taunting expression. I just wanted to give you a fighting chance, Lola. Tyler's voice was hard and cold. I could feel my body stiffen at his words, and a small smile twitched onto his face. What do you mean? I snapped. Something about the look on his face had my hair standing on end. Tyler's small smile widened, taking on a full-blown smirk. It wasn't one filled with playful intentions, it was one full of secrets. You didn't think I would just let Maddox steal my pack, did you? Tyler scoffed, crossing his arms over his chest. I rolled my eyes at him. Every pack within 500-mile radius hates you, Tyler. You can't take back a pack the size of Maddox's on your own. Tyler's smirk turned into a grin, and he flashed me a set of white teeth. Oh, I'm not alone. I have some new friends. The last thing your new little alpha would ever expect. New friends? Maya sounded confused. No pack would dare fight against Alpha Maddox. Something about his words had my teeth on edge, and everything inside of me wanted to run straight to Maddox. Go. Tell your alpha what little you know. It won't change a thing. Tyler taunted, taking a few steps back until he began to merge with the forest. Good luck, Tyler. I snapped, turning around. You'll need it. I refused to let Tyler see my worry, or my fear. A year away from him had suited me well. Did you enjoy the notes, Lola? Tyler's words had me hesitating, my back turned on my first love. A friend of mine has been dying to meet you. He simply couldn't help himself. My hesitation only lasted a split second before I walked calmly into the forest, Tyler's laugh echoing in my mind. Chapter 12. The absolute last thing I wanted to do was run to Alpha Maddox, especially after what happened in the locker room. I had no excuse for being out by the swimming hole again, and was equally dreading and anticipating his reaction. I walked back to the pack house, my stomach a mess of knots and confusion. I wonder who his friend is? Maya inquired, sending her thoughts flooding through my head. I grimaced at her words. Whoever it is doesn't seem like a friend to us. Why leave notes for us though? Maya shook her head. Something isn't adding up. Maybe his friend just likes toying with people. I shrugged. Tyler sure does. That's how the 15-minute walk to the pack house was spent. Maya and I exchanged theories and questions, neither of us coming to any conclusion. I walked into the pack house and was instantly greeted by Alpha Maddox's beta. I hadn't seen him since he questioned me the night of Katie's death. Lola, right? Beta Drake cocked his eyebrow at my sudden appearance. While Alpha Maddox failed to intimidate me, Beta Derek was an entirely different story. I had no intention showing my intimidation with his scarred body and towering form. Chris was right about one thing: bigger men are much slower and fall harder. That's me. I nodded, looking around at the newly refurbished pack house. The training grounds was a separate wing of the pack house, positioned off to the side of the property. The main wing of the pack house held many bedrooms, and the Alpha's office. I had spent many of my childhood years in this pack house, running around with Tyler. It was both refreshing and saddening how much the house had changed. Tyler's mom always had the house in light pastels. Hints of blues, yellows and pinks were thrown about. Alpha Maddox must have refurbished the entire thing when he took over the pack. The light pastels were now gone, replaced with white and small amounts of black. It gave the pack house a clean and pristine look. It looked more like a showroom rather than a house that people lived in. There were no personal items decorating the walls, not a single picture in sight. A house that once held 2 generations, was now barren. What did you come here for, Lola? Beta Drake raised his eyebrow, peeking over the page of writing he held in front of his face. I cleared my throat and steadied my nerves in the process. I need to speak with Alpha Maddox. Something danced in the back of Beta Drake's eyes, something curious. And why would you need to speak with the Alpha? I pursed my lips together impatiently. It's about Katie's death. I lied. There was no way I planned on telling Maddox's beta my ex-boyfriend and old Alpha made an appearance on pack territory. The first thing out of his mouth would be to ask me why the hell I didn't alert them immediately. Beta Drake set his paper down among the others and locked his eyes on my own. And why didn't you provide this information the night of her death? I didn't make the connection at the time. I clenched my teeth together. I always hated lying, but this wasn't a conversation I wanted to have with Beta Drake. Hell, it wasn't a conversation I wanted to have with Maddox, but I didn't have a choice in that matter. I'd take Maddox's punishments over Beta Drake's wrath any day. Then why don't you tell me instead? Beta Drake proposed, and I found myself growing more impatient. I sighed, I'd rather just tell Alpha Maddox if you don't mind. Beta Drake paused for a moment, and finally a deep smirk formed on his face. Very well, but I'll inform you now that he's very busy. He won't be happy you interrupted him. Is he ever happy? I grumbled, unable to keep the words from leaving my lips. I clamped my teeth down with an audible click. You have absolutely no self-control. Maya groaned. I'm not going to dignify that statement with a response. I snapped. With an attitude like that, you're going to need some luck. Beta Drake replied, a hint of a smirk lingered in his tone. I followed Beta Drake down countless hallways quietly. I knew the house like the back of my hand, but there was no way I'd tell that to Maddox's Beta. I'm sure it was still common knowledge that I had dated the previous Alpha, but I appreciated that most people didn't bring it up. Beta Drake led me to Tyler's dad's old office and stood in front of the door. Go ahead and knock. Beta Drake gestured to the door with his head, amusement playing in his eyes. I don't suppose you'll stick around in case he tries to kill me. I raised my eyebrow at Beta Drake, who was becoming less intimidating by the second. Beta Drake shook his head, his lips twitching at my words. Don't count on it. Best of luck. And with those last warm and welcoming words, Beta Drake retreated down the hallway. It's now or never. Maya mumbled. It wouldn't kill you to be a little more positive. I rolled my eyes at her. He's going to be annoyed either way. Maya shrugged, I'm positive he'll kill us if we wait to tell him. I lifted my hand and knocked at the heavy oak door. It was silent for a few moments, and I jumped when an irritated Maddox yelled, Come in. I peeked the door open and stepped inside. Maddox was sitting at the large desk in the middle of the room, his honey-colored eyes trailing the words on a piece of paper. He hadn't looked up at me yet, and I resisted the urge to fidget. Well? Maddox snapped, his eyes still glued to the paper in front of him. He hadn't even noticed me yet. My stubborn side decided to make an appearance and I clamped my lips shut, simply standing in silence until Alpha Maddox decided to look up from his papers. A few more seconds passed and he slammed his papers down with a loud thud. His honey eyes burned with irritation when they met my own. Lola. Alpha Maddox snapped, his handsome face contorting into a grimace. Haven't bothered me enough for one day. I felt an incredulous look threaten to come over my face and I concealed it with a snarky smirk. Sorry, you're just so fun and approachable. I smirked at him, I just can't help myself. Alpha Maddox sat back in his chair as he glowered at me. His honey eyes were turning darker by the second, and I took the time to notice how good he looked. He had changed out of his training clothes and now wore some casual business clothes. His button-down shirt was rolled up to his elbows, while the top few buttons were undone. His chocolate hair was tousled and deliciously messy. My heart began to hammer as he stood from his chair, stalking towards me slowly. You have 1 minute to tell me why you are here, Lola. Alpha Maddox growled, his chest rumbling from the depth of his own voice. I pursed my lips and pretended to be lost in thought when I felt a rough hand grasp my chin. 30 seconds, Lola. Alpha Maddox snarled, his hand tightening around my face. As always when it came to Maddox, pain coupled with pleasure and sent exciting tingles down my legs. The thought of his punishments were becoming more and more appealing as time passed. I have some information about Tyler. I gritted my teeth as the name left my lips. Some of Maddox's honey color returned to his eyes as he dropped his hand from my face. Good girl. Maddox commented, his eyes locked on my own. Explain. Something fluttered in between my legs at the sound of his rough voice saying, good girl. It was almost as intoxicating as his deep threats to punish me. I wasn't sure which one I liked more. Knowing he would definitely be pissed, I launched into what happened at the swimming hole today. I skillfully left out the fact I was receiving notes from an unnamed stranger. I couldn't fully process that fact on my own, and the last thing I needed was the entire pack knowing. Alpha Maddox's eyes progressively had gotten darker as I continued my account of today's events. Why were you at the swimming hole, Lola? Maddox's voice had taken on that deadly calm tone, sending chills down my spine. I don't see why I can't go there. I huffed, it's out of the way, and no one else knows about it. Tyler knows about it. Maddox growled, you said Tyler isn't working alone. Which means whoever he's working with also knows. Fine, I see your point. I snapped, watching the fire in Maddox's eyes burn brighter at my disobedience. Why did you not call for the others? Maddox's voice was deadly calm, and my stomach clenched under his intense gaze. Oh, he's pissed. Maya groaned. I rolled my eyes, he'd be more pissed if we didn't tell him. If I called for the others, we wouldn't have found out any of this. I huffed, crossing my arms as I stared back into Maddox's dark eyes. If you had called the others, Tyler would be in my hands. Maddox growled, taking another step towards me. I don't believe that. I shook my head. Tyler was up to something, there was no way he'd let himself get captured. You underestimate my pack. Maddox growled, and you overestimate your little boyfriend. Something burned brighter in Alpha Maddox's eyes at his own words, but I refused to cringe under his fiery gaze. There was not a chance in hell I'd give Alpha Maddox the satisfaction of making me submit. He's not my boyfriend. I snapped back at Maddox. Alpha Maddox paused for a moment. Did you want him to get away, Lola? If any other Alpha had taken over our pack, my next actions would definitely earn me a death sentence. I wasn't sure what kept Alpha Maddox from killing me here and now. I'd like to think it was my charming good looks and absolute refusal of obedience that tempted him into keeping me around. Nonetheless, my next actions weren't something I was proud of. At Alpha Maddox's words, I was seeing red. Maya had roared to life and fueled my own anger. The two of us had completely forgotten who Alpha Maddox was, and lunged at him. I had never been angry like this before. Angry to the point where my vision clouded and I tasted metal on my tongue. Alpha Maddox's expression didn't change as he watched me charge forward. Before my closed fist could reach Alpha Maddox's face, I was slammed rudely into the wall. My fists were yanked above my head, secured against the wall by one of his hands. My chest rised and fell rapidly, the adrenaline from my anger slowly subsiding. Maya pursed her lips. I huffed in response, this was as much as your fault as it was mine. Here's to hoping he doesn't kill us. Maya sighed, I wouldn't mind another one of those punishments. I suppose that answers my question. Alpha Maddox commented more to himself, as he restrained me against the wall. His eyes were fully black now as he looked at my restrained position. The combination of my low-cut tank top and my arms pinned above my head forced me up. I'm positive my face was flushed, and my chest continued to rise and fall rapidly. The rage I was feeling had subsided, but my breath refused to slow. Alpha Maddox's blackened eyes were staring me down. It felt like searing heat lapping at my skin as Maddox's black eyes trailed down the side of my neck. I watched in equal parts horror and confusion as Maddox skillfully removed the belt he was wearing. I'm sure my eyes were practically bulging from the thoughts running through my head. Why is he taking his belt off? Maya had the same frantic tone as I. What was Maddox doing? The prospect of feeling his length inside of me sent a wave of pleasure emerging from my core, and yet I was more than willing to throw it at a demanding Alpha. A cruel smirk formed on Alpha Maddox's perfect face as he watched my large eyes trace his belt. Did you think you wouldn't be punished? Alpha Maddox's voice was strangely soft, while his darkened eyes burned with intensity. My stomach lurched with excitement. All thoughts were out the window. The time nor setting mattered. He could throw me over his desk for all I cared. Alpha Maddox released my hands and spun me around, slamming my chest against the wall. My arms were yanked behind my back and a squeak of pain left my lips. Realization dawned on me as Alpha Maddox wrapped his belt tightly around my wrists. The pain melted with pleasure, only amplifying my desire for the hot-headed Alpha. His office was quickly filled with the clear scent of my arousal, but this time Alpha Maddox didn't retreat. He let his fingers gently intertwine in my hair before he yanked my head back. I peered up into his black eyes, the want and desire plain on my face. You thought I was going to FKU? Alpha Maddox's rough voice was questioning as he looked down at me. Only good girls get FKED, Lola. Chapter 13. You thought I was going to FKU? Alpha Maddox's rough voice was questioning as he looked down at me. Only good girls get FKED, Lola. Something flashing in the depths of his eyes made me gulp. If he wasn't going to FK me, what did he have planned? Alpha Maddox grabbed the belt that bound my hands, yanking roughly as he pulled me over to his office chair. The belt pinched my wrists, and I bit back a whimper that threatened to escape my lips. Alpha Maddox sat down in his chair, pulling me until I stood in front of him. Remove your pants. Alpha Maddox's honey gaze was flecked with black, his voice even and calm. My stomach lurched and a warm heat flooded my face. Is he serious? Maya hissed. I clenched my legs together, trying to hide the obvious smell of my arousal. Something about Alpha Maddox taking charge, allowing the most primal part of him to show, was incredibly seductive. Nonetheless, I placed a defiant stare on my face. While excitement and allure churned in my gut, I refused to be thrown around without putting up a fight. Alpha Maddox wanted obedience. He would soon learn that his punishments encouraged the opposite. I will not ask you again, Lola. Alpha Maddox's voice had turned deadly, a low growl lingering in his words. Another annoying pang of excitement ran through me. Defiance had come naturally for me, and I relished in my independence. Once I had learned to truly defend myself, the submissive and quiet part of me had died. I clamped my teeth down on my lip, a habit I had formed over the years. Alpha Maddox's reaction was near instantaneous. His eyes had darkened and flickered down to my lip. Stop that! Alpha Maddox snapped, sending another rush of excitement through me. I let my eyes grow wide, a picture-perfect look of innocence clouding my features. I looked down at Alpha Maddox and batted my eyes. Stop what, Maddox? I gaped innocently, running my teeth across my soft lip. A low snarl sounded from Alpha Maddox's chest as he grabbed the belt that bound my hands and yanked me forward. You just had to call him Maddox. Maya grumbled and rolled her eyes. I grinned innocently, oops. I stumbled forward and my bound hands connected with Alpha Maddox's chest. I was extremely aware of how hard his chest felt beneath my hands. Let go of me. I growled, my core clenching as Alpha Maddox grabbed fistfuls of my shorts. You should have thought about that earlier, Lola. Alpha Maddox glowered at me, his jaw taut. A yelp of surprise left my lips as Alpha Maddox ripped my shorts from my body, dropping them to the floor. He moved faster than I thought possible, yanking the belt and throwing me over his lap. I was silently thankful I chose underwear that provided some form of coverage. I had my cheeky black underwear on, and squirmed as I was draped across Alpha Maddox's lap. My bottom was in the air, and I felt mildly self-conscious over that fact. As defiant as ever, I wondered what the hell he was going to do. A simple spanking couldn't possibly be considered an actual punishment. Stop moving! Alpha Maddox snarled, his darkened eyes blazing. His fingers were intertwined in my hair, yanking my head back so I locked eyes with him. His hand yanked the hair tie from my head, letting my raven locks fan over my shoulder. My arms were pulled forward as Alpha Maddox hooked his belt to the side of the chair, keeping me locked in place. A familiar pressure began building in between my legs at the thought of him touching my bare bottom. I opened my mouth to speak, to let out some snide remark when a sharp sting ran through my backside. A yelp of shock left my lips instead. What was that, Lola? Alpha Maddox mused, his voice low and husky as I recovered from the slap to my backside. I could see Maddox's hand lift and slam down again, causing another yelp to leave my lips. 3 smacks later, the yelps of pain were turning into something new. As the lump beneath my stomach grew, the pain began mixing with pleasure. It was to know Maddox was getting off. Whether he admitted it or not, he wanted my disobedience. He wanted a reason to punish me, to exert dominance over me. The heat pooling in between my legs was almost unbearable, an itch that was begging to be scratched. The scent of my arousal was thick in the air, as was the stinging slap of flesh against flesh. Please, the word left my lip in a whisper, my resolve finally cracking. My body ached under his touch, and it needed more than just a simple taste. Use your words, Lola. Alpha Maddox's voice was rough and husky, only encouraging the wetness between my thighs. What do you want? I want you. I ground my teeth together as another slap hit my backside. The words were right there, on the cusp of my lips. They were begging to be spoken, and yet I wanted to keep them to myself. I want more. Alpha Maddox's bulge was pressing painfully against my stomach, sending heat rushing to my core. His body was responding to my own, wanting the same as I. I felt Maddox's fingers tangle in my loose hair, yanking my head back so I could look into his face. The ghost of a smirk formed on his chiseled face, while victory gleamed in his eyes. A frustrated whimper nearly left my lips when the belt around my wrists was removed. Have you learned your lesson, Lola? Alpha Maddox's voice was hard, his face an emotionless mask that left me confused. Yes. The word left my lips quietly, fueled by my desire for more. I would have admitted anything in that moment, anything to have his hand drift between my shaking thighs. Say it. Alpha Maddox snapped, his blackened eyes burning into my own. I want to hear you say it, Lola. I'll be a good girl. My eyes were wide and my face flushed, I was sure he could see the pooling within them. The pain had awakened something new within me, opened doors that I had never once thought about. Stand up. Alpha Maddox's eyes had softened infinitesimally, but his voice remained hard. I pulled myself from his lap, hastily yanking my shorts back in place. I flinched at how sore my backside was, the simple motion of standing made my bottom radiate pain. The heat and wetness between my thighs was far from satiated. While part of me scrambled to find some way to get Maddox to continue, my pride felt wounded. I told him I would be good, and the thought of being rewarded was almost worth it. Remember this lesson for tomorrow, Lola. Alpha Maddox's lips turned up in a smirk, making him look handsome and devious. I know I certainly will. I picked my pride from the floor and scurried from Alpha Maddox's office, desperate to clear my head. I could only pray the scent of my arousal hadn't flooded from his office, letting the rest of the pack house know exactly what I had been up to. Evening patrol resumed as usual, and I truly hoped the other night was a one-off. Mason and Brianna met me at my front door, the three of us rearing to go. Brianna was stuck with another group for patrol, stationed on the other side of town. "Oh, I meant to let you know, we're going to a part tomorrow." Brianna shrugged, as if it were just another weekday. Werewolves never truly worried about drinking or partying. We could do both easily and return to work the next day. It took far too much alcohol to get a werewolf drunk, and when it did happen it wasn't a pretty sight. I lifted my eyebrow at Brianna, noticing Mason was equally invested in the conversation. "A party?" "Yup." Brianna shrugged, "It's Chelsea's birthday tomorrow night and half of the town is going." "Why would we go to Chelsea's birthday?" I rolled my eyes, "I'm positive she won't want us there." "It's at Hayes." Brianna rolled her eyes, knowing Chelsea couldn't keep us out of the most popular club in town. "There's gonna be tons of guys there, so we're going." Hayes was the club where Tyler had found his mate. I held no ill thoughts towards the club itself, just the people I had gone with at the time. Something in the pit of my stomach pulsed, knowing there was only one guy I'd want to run in at Hayes. "You said half the town would be there." I raised my eyebrow at Brianna, trying to conceal the meaning in my words. Brianna smirked, intelligence flashing in her eyes. "You might find who you're looking for at Hayes." "I can't promise anything though." "Looking for someone specific?" Mason inquired, the side of his lip twitching down. I shook my head, "Just an old friend, but I doubt they'll be there." I lied through my teeth, not wanting another person in on mine and Alpha Maddox's strenuous situation. "Well, count me in." Mason grinned, his expression bringing a smile to my face. "I'll pick you both up at Lola's house." Brianna chuckled as she began walking in the opposite direction. "Be ready at 9. 1 hour to get ready." I shook my head mournfully, remembering we had patrol from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. "You'll look beautiful either way." Mason grinned cheerfully as we continued our walk to the patrol site. Patrol that night went effortlessly. Things were so peaceful, you'd wonder if a girl truly died the other night. The calm before the storm. Maya murmured. "Well, thank you for that positive bit of information." I rolled my eyes, hoping my gloomy wolf was wrong. I got home that night and nearly choked as my eyes landed on the white index card that sat on my bed. "Another one?" Maya grumbled, "How is someone getting in here?" I frowned and walked to the only window in my bedroom. My room faced the back of the house. Behind the yard was the sprawling forest. It wasn't a stretch that someone made their way from the forest to drop a note in my bed. What was worrisome was the fact that this person had no scent. I couldn't detect a single thing about them. If it wasn't for the note, I wouldn't have noticed the intrusion at all. While the forest was right behind our backyard, the patrol line extended far beyond that. The entire town was encompassed and ran through multiple times during patrol. Many stations were set up throughout the forest, keeping an eye on anyone that comes or goes. I flipped the index card over and looked at the grainy photo that fell out. Even blurred, I knew the three faces I was looking at. Mason, Brianna, and I were standing on the sidewalk. This was from just a few hours ago, just as we were walking to our patrol sites. Keep your friends close, Lola. Chapter 14. The moment I picked the crisp index card up from my bed, I knew I wouldn't get a full night's sleep. Tyler had specifically said his friend was leaving the notes. The only friend I could think of was one of the other alphas, and all were too afraid of Alpha Maddox to dare cross onto his territory. Somehow, someone was getting onto Alpha Maddox's territory and leaving these notes. The fact that they could cloak their scent meant they weren't someone to be messing with. As I thought, sleep refused to end my misery for half the night. I settled for locking my windows tight and drawing the curtains. The slightest crack in the curtains began to creep me out, so I tied them shut tightly. I must have managed to sleep a whopping 4 hours last night, as my head was pounding and foggy when I woke that morning. My alarm got me up an hour before training began, and I used the time wisely. I ran to the bathroom and washed the sleep from my face, feeling refreshed as the cool water splashed against my skin. I kept it simple, throwing on a tank top and workout shorts. I walked downstairs just in time to interrupt what seemed like an interesting conversation between Dad and Grandma. Once again they looked like two kids who didn't want to be caught. That only piqued my curiosity. "Don't let me interrupt, continue your conversation." I raised my eyebrow at the two of them, taking a deep gulp of coffee. "Nonsense, it wasn't important to begin with." Grandma chided me, setting a plate of eggs and sausage down on the table. Grandma was skilled at many things. Lying was one of those many things. Living with her for a year, however, gave me too much time to analyze Grandma. When Grandma lied, she often tried to change the subject with food or sweets. And if that didn't work, she'd bring up some other random topic. "Important enough for you both to go quiet when I came down." I raised my eyebrow and looked at the two of them. Dad was a horrible liar, one thing he didn't get from Grandma. Dad sat across the table uncomfortably, nursing his coffee as though it demanded all attention. "It was nothing important, Lola." Grandma pursed her lips. "How's training going with Alpha Maddox?" Knowledge flashed in her green eyes and I ground my teeth together. Did Grandma really just insinuate what I thought she did? Maya gaped, looking at the old woman in equal wonder and horror. I nodded. She sure did. Thus proving, they don't want me to know what they were talking about. "Smooth, Lola." Maya nodded. "Training's going great." I nodded, stuffing some food in my mouth. "Really?" Grandma's lips twitched in a little smirk, her eyes shimmering. "Why'd you go to the pack house yesterday afternoon?" Some of my eggs caught in my throat and I covered a cough with a healthy gulp of coffee. Grandma's question got the attention of Dad, who set his coffee down with a questioning look my way. Grandma was smart, much too smart. She successfully redirected the entire conversation over to me, and now I needed to cover my own ass. Did the Alpha need help with something? Grandma hid her smirk behind a cup of coffee, but I could see her eyes shimmering with amusement. "You were at the pack house yesterday." Dad grunted. "You didn't piss off the Alpha again, did you?" "No, not at all." I forced my voice to remain calm, not at all defensive. "Just wanted to ask if they found anything out about Katie's death." A sharp image of me bent over Alpha Maddox's lap came to mind, my bare bottom raised in the air as his hand met my skin. I hastily pushed that thought from my head before the rosy blush could creep up my cheeks. "It was most likely just a rogue attack, Lola." Dad frowned. "We had quite a bit of those back in my day." "You're probably right." I shrugged, happy for the subject change, I just had to ask. Mason and Brianna met me at the front door and together we walked over to the pack house. You sore from yesterday? Brianna chuckled, referring to when I trained with Alpha Maddox. This time a blush did creep up my face. I hadn't even thought about the rest of the soreness on my body. The only soreness at the front of my mind was my aching bottom. Oh, yeah. I nodded. I need to find an upper hand against him. Especially if I'm gonna be stuck partnering with him. Seems like Alpha Maddox has it out for you. Mason chuckled. It's a love-hate relationship. Brianna snickered and I shot her a look. Lola doesn't like a bang, and that pisses the Alpha off. Mason looked taken aback for a moment, and he hasn't killed you yet. Maybe he needs the numbers. I shrugged, I'm also not really a threat. Maybe not to Alpha Maddox. Mason shook his head, as if a bad memory crossed his mind. I was sore for days after we trained together. I can't help it. I smirked at Mason, you're just too slow. You wait, once training is done I'll be the first one to kick that little ass. Mason raised his eyebrow at me, his hand extended. Deal. I smirked, and shook his hand. You better be careful messing with the Alpha though. Mason shook his head, something troubling lingered behind his eyes. Playing with fire, Lola. Duly noted. I smirked, walking into the pack house behind them. I remembered what I told Alpha Maddox last night and nearly sighed. I promised to be good for a change. Well, I promised to be a good girl. If I was being honest, the only reason I planned to play nice was to get something in return. Only good girls get FK'd. His husky words played through my mind on a constant loop. Fine, Alpha Maddox. I would be a good girl. Mason headed to the guys' locker room, while Brianna and I headed to the girls'. I stuffed my bag in the locker and headed out to the mats. Mason was already there and waiting. He definitely looked good. His tank top highlighted his biceps and muscular chest. Mason was just too big to gain any more speed, much too large to maneuver as quickly. The chattering died down as Alpha Maddox stepped into the room. Two of his warriors followed behind. I couldn't still the swarm of butterflies that formed in my stomach, nor the prospect of being partnered with Maddox. His honey-colored eyes roamed the room, never once glancing my way. His hair sat messily on his head, while his black t-shirt rippled and dipped as it pressed against his muscles. Continue with offense and defense. Alpha Maddox's voice was rough and commanding, my men will be going around the room to help with your techniques. Lola. His deep voice pulled me from my explicit thoughts. Mason gave me a sympathetic look, while Brianna smirked. I walked over to Alpha Maddox, my heart thumping in my chest. My heart nearly stopped entirely when Chelsea twitched up to Alpha Maddox. She was wearing a sports bra that must have been 4 sizes too small. Her breasts were nearly popping out of the low-cut tank top she wore. Her shorts were hiked up so high the bottoms of her BTT cheeks poked out. Lola, pair off with Kenyon. Alpha Maddox nodded to a tall guy with skin the color of fresh espresso. Maddox's eyes were hard and met my own for only a fraction of a second. Chelsea's smug eyes met my own, a cruel smirk forming on her face as she nodded over to Kenyon. I ground my teeth together and stalked off towards Kenyon, unsure what game Alpha Maddox was playing at. Did you see what she was wearing? Maya fake gagged in my mind, might as well just wear a bra and panties. Someone's desperately trying to become Luna. I rolled my eyes. Whatever weird thing Alpha Maddox and I had going on, had nothing to do with me trying to be Luna. If anything, dating Tyler taught me something important. Being Luna wasn't for me. I didn't want to be the center of attention, having an entire pack riding on my shoulders. Lola, right? Kenyon grinned, showing gleaming teeth. That's me. I nodded, forcing a smile to my own face. I remembered Kenyon from well over a year ago. We had never been friends, but we hadn't been enemies either. Simply two people who had very different friend groups. Kenyon had completely changed over the years. Braces came off and muscles replaced the acne. I couldn't stop myself when my eyes flickered over to where Maddox was standing. My blood turned hot in my veins, chafing uncomfortably. Alpha Maddox was fighting Chelsea. I could hear her obnoxious giggles as she tried to throw a punch at Alpha Maddox, only to have him block it and yank her forward. He was being unnecessarily gentle with her, only fueling my anger. Why is she even here? Maya growled irritably, she can't even defend herself. The butterflies I had been feeling turned into pissed-off wasps as the familiar feeling of jealousy coursed through my veins. FK this, I mumbled under my breath and peeled my eyes away from Chelsea and Alpha Maddox. As bad as this may sound, I took my anger out on Kenyon. While Kenyon wasn't the biggest leakin around, he was slim enough to be considered fast whilst having enough muscle to land a decent punch. His speed made me work harder to outmatch him, and the red-hot jealousy I was feeling fueled me even further. I kept my eyes glued on Kenyon as we trained, refusing to even glance Maddox's way. Chelsea's giggles and squeals were annoyingly loud, only fueling my anger. We're much stronger when we're pissed. Maya growled as we dodged another of Kenyon's attacks. My muscles burned, but the burning fueled me further. I welcomed the ache, the sweat, and the breathlessness. Chris's voice flashed through my head, guiding me as Kenyon continued to advance. Kenyon lunged forward, switching to the side a second before his body came into contact with my own. I wasn't sure how, but I anticipated the move. I knelt down just a second before his body was supposed to hit my own, and sent my elbow flying into his abdomen. The move had its desired effect. My elbow smashed into Kenyon's ABS, and he let out a sharp grunt before he tumbled over onto the floor. I stood from my spot and held my hand out for him. Lola. Kenyon huffed, rubbing a hand against his battered torso. You hit pretty hard. I couldn't help the snort that came through my lips. You think so? For sure. Kenyon nodded with a bright smile. See you tomorrow, Lola. I waved Kenyon off and grimaced as my eyes made their way to Chelsea. She was talking very animatedly to Alpha Maddox, a hand on her hip as she turned and waved him off. Alpha Maddox's face was unreadable, but for just a moment his eyes met my own. His honey-colored gaze was emotionless as he looked into my eyes. I had irritation and anger written all over my face. My teeth clicked together in annoyance as the corners of his lips turned up in a smirk. I mumbled to Maya. He's trying to make us jealous. Maya huffed. Chelsea can have him. I snapped, I'm not fighting over a alpha. I changed quickly and stormed from the pack house. Sure, I was probably overreacting, but I didn't care. Jealousy was hot in my veins, as was the image of Maddox sparring with Chelsea. In the past, I had fought so hard for Tyler's attention and I promised myself that would never happen again. I wasn't going to fight to keep Maddox's attention. I was leaning against the brick wall of the training building when Chelsea's obnoxious laugh came closer. Guess you're not the alpha's favorite anymore. Chelsea sneered as she caught me standing against the building. For once she didn't have her little lackeys behind her. I shrugged, never wanted to be the favorite to begin with. Now we all know that's a bold lie. Chelsea chuckled humorlessly, you try so hard, Lola. But you'll always be useless. Thrown to the side the minute someone better comes along. Tyler saw you for what you are, and now Maddox does too. The way she said his name rang out clearly in my head, Maddox. Within seconds I was seeing red. FK being a good girl. I snarled, smiling as my fist connected with Chelsea's face. Chapter 15. Once my fist connected with Chelsea's face, it was as though the anger had completely drained from my body. I was left standing there gaping like a fool. While I didn't regret my actions, I never had the guts to follow through on them before. Brianna was standing just a few feet away, her jaw dropping as she looked at Chelsea. My bad luck continued when Alpha Maddox turned the corner as well. I clamped my jaw shut as Chelsea began wailing at the sight of Alpha Maddox. I hadn't even hit her that hard. Just hard enough to leave a solid bruise on her face. Not nearly hard enough to break skin or blacken an eye. Yet she still whimpered and whined as if I had tried to murder her. Alpha. Chelsea whined, Lola just attacked me out of nowhere. Alpha Maddox's face was cold, and his eyes glanced between the two of us. Something burned in the back of his gaze when he locked eyes with me, and I fought to keep the smirk from forming on my face. Is that true, Lola? Maddox turned his hard gaze on me, the corner of his lip twitching suspiciously. Say no. Maya hissed. Once again, my big mouth got me into trouble. If you consider a punch to the face an attack, then yes. I stared at him deadpan. I attacked her ever so viciously. Lola, do you enjoy being alive? Maya growled under her breath. Quite so. I snipped sarcastically, why do you ask? Really? Maya rolled her eyes, then why do you insist on trying to get us killed? You know, you're awfully negative. I snickered at my temperamental wolf. Shut up, Lola. Maya sighed, shaking her head. Within seconds Maddox had his hand clamped around my forearm, tight enough to cause pain. See you at 9. I called out to a stunned Brianna over my shoulder. Alpha Maddox's pace was fast as he dragged me along with him. My feet stumbled and tripped to keep up. Alpha Maddox took me around to the front of the house, storming around to the forest line with my arm in his grip. Confusion washed over me as he passed the pack house. Where was he planning on taking me? Alpha Maddox stormed into the woods, only going a few feet in until I was slammed against a tree. See, Lola. Maya huffed, he's taken us out into the woods so he can kill us in peace. Really? I rolled my eyes, he's the Alpha, he can kill us wherever he wants. You really need to stop being so dramatic. It's called self-preservation, Lola. Maya snapped, you could use some. Do you have no control over yourself, Lola? Alpha Maddox's voice was deadly calm as he backed me up against the tree. I ground my teeth together, determined to control my body as much as I could. I was tired of my body responding under Alpha Maddox's touch. My jealousy was a stable pit of fire in my stomach, giving me the strength to try and control my arousal. I have plenty control, Alpha. I gritted my teeth and spat my reply. Alpha Maddox's honey-colored eyes were growing darker. Care to explain why you attacked Chelsea? Some kind of amusement was flickering in the back of his gaze. Was he actually enjoying all of this? Chelsea's had that coming for a long time. I snapped, extremely aware of the close proximity between Alpha Maddox and I. I could feel his t-shirt brushing against my own, and the smell of him was intoxicating. A deep woodsy cologne mixed with male sweat floated around me. What happened to being a good girl, Lola? Each word was spoken slowly, his voice dropping into a husky growl once he spoke my name. Alpha Maddox's towering form leaned over me, and I couldn't help but notice how his face inched closer to my own. I tried, but it was just too hard. I stuck my bottom lip out in a pout, letting my eyes widen as I looked up at Alpha Maddox. A deep snarl left Alpha Maddox's mouth as he slammed me against the tree again. His rough hand came up to grab my face. His touch wasn't hard enough to bring pain, but there would be no escaping his grasp. I could feel my own willpower weaken as his rough thumb ran across my lower lip. The sensitive spot between my legs instantly began to dampen under his touch. I could see somewhere in the back of his eyes, his willpower was crumbling. The lump in his pants I had felt in the past was proof to the fact that he wanted me. My body reacted on its own under his touch. My tongue darted from my mouth, flicking against this thumb slowly. His thumb dipped past my parted lips, and I flicked my tongue against it hungrily. Just when I thought something more was going to happen, his eyes clouded over. I cursed the stupid mind link. My body was screaming for him. He ignited a fire within me that only he could put out. Whenever Maddox touched me, any thoughts of my veganity flew out the window. I knew sooner or later, he would be the one to steal my veganity. My body refused to give it to anyone else. Once the fog cleared from Maddox's eyes, he removed his hand from my face and took a few steps back. My chest was rising and falling heavily, while desire still lingered in my eyes. "This will be the last time you defy me, Lola." Alpha Maddox's voice was low and rough as he turned away from me. "Don't count on it." My words sounded breathless, but the fire that fueled my defiance was still roaring. Alpha Maddox stopped in his tracks. "I will contact you once I've thought out a suitable punishment for your attack on Chelsea." Without another word, Alpha Maddox turned and took off back to the pack house. I used the walk back home to clear my scattered mind. For whatever reason, I wanted Alpha Maddox in a way I hadn't wanted another male. Every time I found myself alone with him, my willpower crumbled as though it had never been there to begin with. I couldn't find the strength any longer to resist the intoxicating pull I felt towards him. I opened the front door to the house silently, hearing my grandma and dad's hushed voices in the kitchen. They hadn't noticed me come in. I closed the front door slowly, keeping my ears trained on their conversation. "She can't know, hurt her find out." My dad's voice was a strained whisper. "Deserves poor, vampire." My grandma's voice held a semblance of anger and I froze at the last word she spoke. Vampires existed in the world just as us Leekins. Humans were blissfully unaware that they were surrounded by monsters. Vampires had never posed a threat to Leekins before. We ran in large packs and were simply too strong to come up against. While Leekins enjoyed the warm weather, vampires preferred the cold. Vampires never ran in groups larger than 2 to 3 at a time. They weren't family or pack-oriented. They stuck to themselves and only emerged from the shadows for something to eat. Hell, the last reported vampire scene was well over 16 years ago. Why would Dad and Grandma be talking about them now? "Quiet!" Grandma hissed at my dad, pulling me from my thoughts. Grandma's head peeked around the corner, and a carefree smile was plastered on her face. "Oh, you're back, I made some lunch." Grandma grinned, gesturing for me to come into the kitchen. I plastered a weary smile on my own face, doing my best to hide the fact I heard far too much of their conversation. I hadn't received any useful information, but I now knew they were hiding something from me. I simply wondered what that something had to do with vampires. I ate lunch with a cheerful grandma and a silent dad, passing the time as quickly as I could. I wanted to leap from my chair and demand they tell me the truth, but I knew they'd just deny what I heard. Time passed rather slowly, and finally 6 p.m. rolled around. I slipped from the house with a forced wave to my dad and grandma, grateful for Mason's cheerful company. "So, you punched a girl in the face?" Mason chuckled, shaking his head. His arm was draped lightly over my shoulder as we walked, but it didn't feel awkward or strange. It felt friendly and was simply part of Mason's carefree attitude. "Sure did." Brianna shook her head, but a smirk played on her lips. Alpha Maddox drug her off. "And you're still alive?" Mason's steps faltered at Brianna's words, his smile slipping from his lips. "I'm thinking Alpha Maddox has a soft spot for Lola." Brianna nodded thoughtfully, either that or he just really wants to sleep with her. Mason looked slightly uncomfortable, so I happily changed the subject to the party tonight. "Oh, there's no way Chelsea's gonna show up to her own birthday party with a huge bruise on her face." Brianna snickered, "She'll cover it by the time the party rolls around." Patrol went effortlessly tonight. The forest surrounding the territory was completely quiet. The only sounds came from the creatures that lived within the woods. Not a single sighting of a rogue or other was brought to anyone's attention. Mason and I simply spent the time dashing around the forest, allowing our wolves a bit of free time. Brianna met up with me at my house with a bag full of makeup and 2 dresses in tow. Once she saw the state of my closet, she insisted on helping me get ready. "You ever think there's something more going on between you and Alpha Maddox?" Brianna asked, raising her eyebrow as she brushed my face with some light-colored powder. I frowned, "Like what?" I had just told Brianna what happened in the woods by the pack house, and she was definitely surprised. "It seems like the guy can't keep his hands off of you." Brianna shrugged, but something lingered in her eyes. "You're holding something back." I huffed, I was tired of the secrets. "Just say it." "All right." Brianna pursed her lips as she applied eyeliner to my lids. "Does Alpha Maddox have a mate?" "What?" I twitched, feeling Brianna drag the eyeliner down my cheek with the sudden movement. I said, "Does Alpha Maddox have a mate?" Brianna asked impatiently, using her other hand to hold my head still. "I mean, with the way he's touched me, I certainly hope not." I clamped my teeth together. "From what I hear, he doesn't." Brianna gave me a pointed look. "He's 23 years old and doesn't have a mate. Do you know how rare that is?" "What's your point?" I asked, perplexed. "What if you're his mate?" Brianna huffed, and the pieces in my head clicked together. "He's definitely not my mate." I shook my head as Brianna handed me the mirror to look myself over. "You're only 18. You never know." Brianna rolled her eyes. "No, really, it's not possible." I shook my head. There was no way that was even an option. "I don't feel anything romantic for him. And besides, I'm not a Luna. I'm not Luna material. I'm stubborn and I don't listen to anyone. I can't run a pack." Brianna dropped the subject for now, but I could see a retort burning in her eyes. Either way, it didn't matter. Alpha Maddox clearly had no romantic feelings towards me, and I felt exactly the same. It was all physical. 2 people who just had a physical connection. Alpha Maddox clearly liked my blatant defiance, and I found his primal and dominating personality to be a turn-on. My raven hair flowed down my back in a sea of black waves, and the smoky makeup made my green eyes stand out brilliantly. Ever since I told Brianna what Tyler had said about me wearing black, she insisted I wear it more. She claimed it made my eyes stand out and gave me that bad girl edge. I chuckled at the obsidian-colored fabric that poked out of Brianna's bag. "Let me guess, you're making me wear the black one." I smirked at Brianna through the mirror. "Obviously." She chuckled as she applied her own eyeliner. I slipped on the black dress and looked it over in the mirror. The fabric was flat and black, holding no shine. It clung to my curves perfectly and ended around mid-thigh. The neckline wasn't super low. I have no clue if Alpha Maddox will be there tonight. Brianna raised her eyebrow at me as she saw the look on my face, but if he is, he won't be able to keep his eyes or hands off of you. I'm looking forward to that. I chuckled, deep down hoping he would show. Chapter 16. Mason showed up at my house right on time. He looked cute in his light button-down shirt and slacks. His sandy blonde hair was swooped to the side in his usual Superman-type hairstyle. "Whoa, you look great, Lola." Mason beamed at me, a light pink blush tinging his cheeks. "You too, Brianna." We piled into Brianna's car and took off for Hayes. Hayes was located just outside of the Pax territory. An entire city was just out of bounds. While we weren't forbidden from going into the city, we were expected to be on our best behavior. The city was filled with humans, none of which knew the existence of our kind. Due to Hayes's close proximity with our pack, many Leakins frequented the club. The bartender, bouncer, and owner were all Leakins, allowing us to drink at almost any age. The whole 21 and up rule never quite applied for Leakins. It took far too much for us to feel the effects of alcohol, rendering the 21 and older rule useless. Hayes hadn't changed in my time away. The bright cursive sign flashed with the beat of the thundering music. The ground outside practically vibrated from the bass inside. I looked around thinking about the last time I had been here. It was Tyler's 18th birthday, and my entire world had come crashing down in the span of an hour or so. This time would be different. There would be no Tyler, no hearts getting broken tonight. While I was insanely physically attracted to Alpha Maddox, I was thankful my heart wasn't on the line. I couldn't stand getting attached to yet another Alpha, just to learn I'm not their intended mate. Brianna, Mason, and I approached the front door of the club. It was located on a busy street and many people lined up for a chance to go inside. "Alpha Maddox sends his regards," Brianna murmured to the bouncer. The sentence was a code of sorts. It allowed the bouncer to know who to let in first, without revealing anything important. "Straight on in, miss." The muscular bouncer nodded, waving us ahead. After a quick glowing stamp to the top of our hands, we were let into the club. Every other month the inside of Hayes changed. This time black satin hung over the entrance, brushing softly against my skin as we pushed through them. The inside of Hayes was lit by dancing purple and green lights. It gave the club a badass kind of feel, the color reminding me of poison. The purple and green lights flashed, highlighting the bodies swaying on the dance floor. The air was thick with perfume, sweat, and the general that comes with a few strong drinks. "Wanna dance?" Brianna shouted over the music, her eyes flitting from person to person. I shook my head, "I'm gonna get a drink first," I yelled back. Brianna nodded, "Good thinking." Her and Mason followed me over to the bar. The bar was a shiny obsidian material that ran the length of one of the walls. Countless bottles of alcohol were scattered towards the back. 3 different people ran the bar, all flitting from person to person. "What can I get for you ladies?" The tall bartender smirked at Brianna and I, purposefully ignoring Mason. By all intents and purposes, the bartender was cute. Tall and slim, with hints of muscle running down his arms. His black hair fell over his forehead, a bright green stripe running down the side. "Coconut rum, on ice," I called out over the music. Brianna shouted out some fruit drink and Mason got some kind of beer. "Starting strong, I see." Brianna chuckled. I shrugged, "It's not like I can get drunk anyway." While it took forever to get drunk, we could still gain something from the alcohol. Personally, alcohol made me feel warm and just a little more relaxed. IDs? The bartender asked, but locked eyes with the glowing stamp on our hands. Confusion flitted over my face and Brianna turned to speak in my ear. Special stamps let them know you're over 21. Brianna chuckled in my ear. The bartender made our drinks quickly and set them in front of us, flitting to the neck waiting person. This club's really going to the dumps if they're already letting the trash in. A familiar, nasal voice sneered. I'll show her trash. Maya growled, itching for another go at her. Chelsea twitched by Brianna and I, her dark-haired servant trailing after her. Chelsea's dress truly left nothing to the imagination. It was extremely low-cut, and somehow just managed to cover her bottom. Not only was it sparkly, but it was a Peptol Bismol shade of pink. Add a silver pair of heels and a sash that says birthday girl, and Chelsea's look is complete. Maybe she'll find her mate tonight and back off Alpha Maddox. Brianna shrugged, nudging me with her elbow. I took a large swig of my drink, grimacing as the alcohol burned my throat. Doubtful. I grimaced, if she wants to be Luna that bad, she won't care if they're mates or not. Brianna shuddered, Luna Chelsea. Don't even put that thought in my head. I shuddered along with her. The three of us squished onto the dance floor, the smell of body spray and sweat was much stronger. While I'm sure I lacked skill, I'm not one of those people who hated dancing. I let my body sway to the thundering music, enjoying the way the purple and green lights illuminated my skin. A guy slowly danced up behind Brianna and placed his hands on her hips. I snickered as she whipped around, prepared to give the guy a piece of her mind. The guy was actually kinda hot. His dark hair reached down to his shoulders and he had an apologetic grin on his face. I threw my head back and laughed when Brianna placed her hands on her hips and shook her head. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I'm sure it was an interesting conversation. Whatever the guy responded with must have been a good answer, as Brianna pulled him closer to her and danced with him. Her gaze met my own for a moment and waggled her eyebrows at me, pointing at the guy when he wasn't looking. I gave her a thumbs up and a grin as I continued dancing. Mason had been close by the entire time but had gotten lost in the crowd. I kinda hoped he'd find his own girl to dance with. I didn't know much about Mason's mate situation, but it seemed like he hadn't found her yet. I let the music carry me, and the lights cloud my vision. A strange, fuzzy feeling came over my mind. I was high on the thundering music and the dazzling lights. I hadn't even noticed when Brianna and her mystery guy had disappeared from the crowd. A pair of large hands grasped my hips and I knew instantly from the touch that it wasn't who I wanted it to be. I swung around to meet the eyes of the guy who took it upon himself to touch me, and found myself staring into a pair of swirling blue eyes. This guy wasn't Maddox, but he had his own sort of aura that surrounded him. He was handsome in a dangerous sort of way. Extremely light blonde hair flowed from the top of his head, just grazing his shoulders. Something about his hair made me want to run my fingers through it, and I wondered how soft it truly was. I couldn't place my finger on the source, but this was the most relaxed I had felt in weeks. Well, hello beautiful. The mystery guy smiled. His teeth were blindingly white, and perfectly straight. His smile had that curl to it that made you wonder if he was up to something. Hello mister, I giggled, swaying my hips in time to the music. Alpha Maddox was becoming a distant thought in my head. My enhanced senses were overshining my thoughts. Sweet perfume, husky cologne, sweat, and the sharp smell of swirled around the club in a furious tornado. Does the beautiful girl have a name? The guy grinned, his hands finding their way back to my hips. For once, Maya was silent in my mind. I couldn't focus hard enough to search for her presence, but I couldn't force myself to feel concerned. My mind felt somewhat hazy, and it wasn't from the tiny bit of alcohol I consumed. Lola. I shot the mystery guy a smirk of my own, stepping forward as his large hands tightened around my waist. The mystery guy pulled me in closer, moving his body against my own with the thundering beat of the music. His light-colored hair captured the purple and green lights, making it look as though his hair were changing colors. His snow-like hair, and his deep blue eyes had me mesmerized for a moment. I figured it couldn't hurt to dance with the guy. After all, I wasn't planning on going home with him. Lola. The deviously handsome guy murmured my name in my ear. It sounded like a song as his breath hit the side of my face, fitting for such a beautiful little thing. I wasn't sure how long we danced for. My mind was fluttering, unable to hold a logical thought as I danced against the mystery guy. We only pulled away when someone walked up to him and murmured in his ear. "I'm afraid I have to leave now, Lola. My friend here needs a ride home." The man murmured in my ear, shooting me one of his gleaming grins, "Hopefully we meet again." Once the man walked away through the crowd, I noticed I hadn't even gotten his name. The deafening music and flickering lights muddled my head in ways I currently wasn't enjoying. I pushed past the dancing crowd of people and made my way back to the bar. I couldn't see Brianna anywhere, but Mason sat at the bar talking to one of the bartenders. "Hey, I was looking for you." Mason shot me a cheeky grin as I sat down beside him. "I was just dancing." I chuckled, ordering an ice water for myself. Mason raised his eyebrow and took a sip of his own drink. "You danced for over an hour." "An hour?" I frowned. No wonder my brain was muddled. I danced for over an hour with just a cup of alcohol in my system. Leakin or human, that wasn't good for anyone. "Yup, an hour." Mason nodded. "Brianna was over here looking for you at some point." "Last I saw Brianna, she went off with some guy." I chuckled, my eyes flitting around. After drinking an entire glass of water, my head felt a little better. Not completely clear, but clear enough. "Speaking of a guy." Mason smirked, but something about his expression seemed forced. Alpha Maddox was just at the bar. The sound of Maddox's name had Maya coming forward. "I vote we find him." Maya grinned and sniffed the air. "Now you wanna speak up?" I chuckled. "I've been talking to you this entire time." Maya rolled her eyes and grumbled, "Can't even hear me over the music. I'm actually gonna step out for a minute and get some fresh air." I smiled at Mason. "If you see Alpha Maddox again, let him know where I've gone." "Want some company?" Mason frowned, his head tilting to the side. I shook my head. "Nah, I'm all right. Just need to get away from the music and lights for a minute." "Don't stray too far from the club." Mason frowned, and I elbowed him gently. "I won't, sir." I put a stern look on my face, but at the sight of Mason's cheeky grin a smirk formed on my face. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.